All right, everyone. It's you have a refreshed instructor coming back after vacation. Although none of you really look refreshed. Maybe why doesn't everybody just go on vacation, right? Sorry, you don't want to hear that from me. Yeah. um, but yeah. So we're here at week 6. This is day 1, part 1, and this week we're going to be focusing on shifting gears. Not literally, of course, but in our minds, we're going to be kind of changing the focus of what we're going to be building. This week is not, I don't think I have any new API projects planned for us. If I do, they're probably going to be fairly small in scope. Um, but really, what I want to do is I want to get comfortable more with sort of like the core of Django. I want to serve up, let's just go to Django's homepage for the video so that it's not really weird. I want to talk about the core of Django and how we can use Django to serve up a web page that will consume our API. Because so far we've been building API clients. Like you all have been building API clients all the way along here. Maybe not every day, but we've been building those CLIs, the command line interface projects like the ATM, did we do the sports search database? I don't think we did. Anyways, we've done projects where we've had to interact with an API using the request framework or using the request library. So what that means is that we have experience both building and using our own product. As we like to call in the industry, eating your own dog food. Is that it's a saying in many industries that when you create something, if you are a consumer of what you create, or also known in some circles as getting high on your own supply, that's a good reference. But that's sort of what we are going to do is we're going to create APIs and then we're going to turn around and we're going to use them. The only difference is that in the front end, right, because we're transitioning away from back-end development and into front-end. On the front-end side, we're going to be using JavaScript and friends. I'm going to say JavaScript and friends because nobody just uses JavaScript. Like that is the secret that nobody talks about in JavaScript is that nobody uses just JavaScript. Well, just the same as in Python as like we don't just use Python. We use requests, we use Flask, we use records, we use all those other things. We use Python and friends. It requires less friends to do the work that you need to do in Python. So we're going to have JavaScript that runs in every browser, which, by the way, I promised to all of you that I would show you how to do this, that if you open up a new tab in Chrome, I know we've already covered this once. I don't know how to do this in Safari. Safari is not my web development browser of choice, so I am deficient there. But in Chrome, if you right-click on any page, and typically I'll just open up a new tab and go to Google, if you go to Inspect, this will show you the developer tools. Now, the developer tools by default show up at the bottom, and I've reordered some of these. Like you can click and drag these however you want to, so my order may vary from your order, but we still should see the same basic ones. That's typically Elements, Console, and Network. Those are my top 3 that I like to use in the dev tools. Everything else, like I've used Performance maybe once. If I feel like I do have to go to the Memory tab, typically I just close the window and reopen it. Application security audits, and very, very rarely Ember. Ember is an add-on I installed, so you won't see Ember. But these are the dev tools, and a lot of fun things you could do there. Most importantly for me as a web developer is the network tab. So if we haven't used the network tab much, but trust me, you will use these tools so much over the coming weeks. In the next 3 weeks, if your nose isn't in the dev tools, then you're kind of doing it a little wrong. So, and what I mean by that is that every browser that has this little developer toolbar or this little developer tools here can run JavaScript. So if you ever need to like just test some JavaScript, you don't need to start a new project on your folder. You can just come out here and type console.log hello, and you can run JavaScript here. You can write a function. In more modern browsers, I believe in Chrome, you can now use really advanced features of the language. Whoops. You could still do cool stuff with the language. Like this right here is like, you couldn't do this a couple years ago. I'm not going to explain what I did because that's not the point of this lecture. I'm just showing that you can write fairly complex or modern expressions right here in the console, or you can copy paste a bunch of code and you can see it run right here in the console. Now this console, it's kind of weird to explain how it interacts with the page, but you can kind of think of it kind of running as the side, because in the front end land you have your HTML, which remember we talked about maybe last week or the week before, that like was just originally built to transfer documents. Then CSS came along and was like, hey, we need to actually add color and structure to these documents, or not really structure at that point, but like we need to make our big tags like green. We need to be able to say this is how big an image is, those kinds of things. So the CSS, the cascading style sheets came along. That was a Freudian slip there. And JavaScript then eventually came along, a decade and a half later or so, and said, by the way, we want to be able to, like a ventriloquist, right? We want to move things around, not ventriloquist, like the puppet master. We want to move things around on this page. We want to change values. We actually want to write code and execute it in the browser. And here we are 20-some years later, able to execute code in the browser in a fairly sane way. So there is a lot of history behind front-end development that has brought us to here. Don't worry, you're not going to get that whole history. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with it all. But just to know that your dev tools are oftentimes like your Swiss Army knife as a front-end development. Whereas with back-end development, debugging, print statements, things like that are your Swiss Army knife. But in front end, you get a little bit more rich tools. So, by the way, any questions you have about front end, you can always just stop me and I'll answer them. They don't even have to be about what we're talking about. If you just have a lingering question you've been waiting to get out about front end and back end development, you can always just ask that too. So, this is not going to be a day of dev tools. Like I said, it's going to be a day of Django. But it's important to get it out of the way to show that DevTools is awesome, Network is awesome, and console tabs are awesome. Elements usually just get in my way. It's slow to interact with the elements, but Network is very important. So, who's ready to get started with Django? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So like I said, we are going to start. I need to kill some stuff here. Excuse me while I do some work. All right, I am not going to make this project in week 6 notes because, like I said, I want to. Well, we can do that. I don't know why I'm not. So let's start our week 6 notes file, and we're gonna do the whole direnv thing because if you have a direnv within a direnv, it does get more specific. So we can go through the motions and it'll be the exact same as if you were working on a project in isolation. So I need to make a week 6 projects or a notes directory. And I'm going to cd into it. So if you don't have that already, please do that in your notes for week 6. And I'm going to make a new project. And so we're going to do a little bit syntax that's different here with creating a Django project, because if we do it the same old way, we're going to get like 3 directories deep, and it's just going to be kind of a pain to manage. So I'm going to make a new directory inside of the week 6 directory, and I'm going to call this directory front end fun. Yeah, I like that, because that's what we're going to have. We're going to have front end fun. And you're going to cd into front end fun. Okay, now that we're in there, let's open up Atom, because something that we haven't been covering is git ignore. And we all need to know about git ignore. So we're going to do that now. Notice how I open up Atom in the front end fun directory. It's just going to be Atom space period. And there's nothing in there. Everybody see that same thing? Or if you see files and directories in here, you've done it wrong. So we need to address that. So I'm going to create a new file right here by control-clicking on front end fun. And it's going to be period git ignore, all one word. What does the period denote, by the way, for a file on like a Unix-like operating system? The dot has a very, very specific meaning up front. Hmm? So having a leading dot on a file denotes to the operating system that this is a hidden file, that you need sort of elevated privileges, or you need to sort of know what you're doing to ask to see it. So if we just opened up our Finder here and looked at all of the files in our home directory, we wouldn't see any of them that have the dot in front of it. But if we did like a special ls command through our terminal, we'd probably see like 100 hidden files. So gitignore wants to be a hidden file. So let's create that. And what gitignore is it's a list of patterns of files that we want Git to literally ignore from version control. The first of which that we want it to ignore is the direnv directory. We don't want to send our direnv directory up to GitHub. Because that, while it's okay if you have, or okay if you haven't, if you send up your direnv directory to GitHub, you're essentially sending up a full install of the Python installation. So you don't want to send Python up to GitHub. That is not great. It's not bad, but it's also not great. So we just want to not do it. So the way that you do that is you just type the name of the directory that you don't want to add, which I believe it's .direnv as well. Yeah, it's .direnv. And then you put a forward-facing slash in front of it. And that's going to say, if this, in my Git repository, if it finds any directories called .direnv, it's not going to add it to the repository. All right, now here's another line that is probably you all are probably really excited to have, is that I'm going to ignore that annoying PyCache directory. You all have encountered PyCache. Well, PyCache can cause major troubles if you are working together on a project, because say Zach and Kevin are working on a project together. Zach generates a bunch of PyCache files for his computer, pushes them up to GitHub. Kevin generates a bunch of PyCache files to his computer. Now that's just machine code. You can't debug PyCache files. Like, it's almost impossible, especially like even for me, like someone who's been working in Python for as long as I have no idea what they do, or not what they do, but I have no idea the internals of them. So you don't want to send them up to version control. So we just want Git to ignore them. So what we're going to do is we are going to ignore the _ PyCache directory with a forward-facing slash in front of it. All right, we're going to have two more lines in here. The first is going to be all of the PYC files. So in case a PYC file doesn't get included in the PyCache directory, we want to ignore it. So we use typical wildcard syntax here, as we see star dot bless me, PYC. And that will make it so that Git ignores all files with a .pyc extension. And then I'm also going to ignore db.sqlite3, because we want to ignore our database. We don't want to send our database up to GitHub. Again, it's one of those things, like, it's okay if it went up there for the scope of projects that you're working on. In fact, it's probably not terrible if someone wants to pull down one of your projects and poke around with it on their computer, like if they're interviewing you for a job, then they'll have all of the data. But in a real-world production environment where you're working on an app, the database should not be pushed to version control. That's just one of those crazy things that it's okay to do now because we're learning, but long-term, absolutely not. Bad, bad, bad. Did I say there were two more or three more? We done here? I think I said two. So we're done here. All right. Now, the fact that I've made this at the very first thing is very deliberate. Adding a gitignore after the fact will cause really weird things to happen. Because if you add something to Git tracking, and then you add a line in gitignore to it, it doesn't ignore that the file was originally there. It just ignores all changes that you make to it after the fact. So the idea that we've done this before we've actually created any of these files will keep them from entering into tracking in the first place. So that's really what we want there. All right, so let's drop back to the terminal now that we have that gitignore file created. And that's very important. You're going to want to do that for every project, just like we're doing here. What's that? With all four of those fields. Yeah, all four of them. And you might find eventually that you have more. I know when Maddie's going to cover React and those kinds of things, you're going to get a file like this that's generated for you that's like 30 lines long. Now, you don't have to remember it because it's generated for you, but it is crazy. Oh yeah, we also need to create a envrc file. Remember the envrc file? It's required for Durham to allow to cover this stuff. So I'm going to come over here to Atom. I'm going to control click on front end fun and create a new file called .envrc. Make sure you're making a new file and not a new directory. envrc is the configuration that Durham will use for this project directory. It's without an envrc, you're not using Durham. It is the brain of Durham for this project. And all we need to tell it is that we're using Python 3. So the layout is going to be Python 3. So after you've done that, you can press enter in your terminal, and it should give you this error that says run Durham allow to allow its content. That's absolutely what we want. That's going to install a Python interpreter into this directory. Notice that it created this Durham directory. So that's cool. We got that going for us. And I'm going to show you a new file that we're going to create. And this is called a requirements.txt file. This is something that's required as your projects get bigger and bigger in scope, and they rely on more code that's just not your own. Is that it allows you to define all of the projects that your project relies on, like Django and Django REST Framework and all of those. So let's make a new file in the front-end fun directory. It's going to be called requirements.txt. I don't know why the .txt is there. It doesn't need to be. It's mostly a convention at this point that everybody just doesn't want to abandon. But we call it requirements.txt. And we can list off the projects that our project is going to use. For example, first off, we're going to be using Django. So you just type Django. We know we're also going to need Django REST Framework. So I'm going to type Django REST Framework. You know what? We may or may not need it. I don't think we will today, but we want Joser too. Anything else you can think of we might need? What's that? Requests? That's if we want to integrate. We can put requests here. Maybe down the road we might want it later. That's fine. Not going to hurt anything. All right, I'm feeling pretty good about these. So these are the requirements of our project. Now, I'm really downplaying the coolness of requirements.txt because requirements.txt allows us to define, it's not just like some file that somebody's going to see online and be like, oh yeah, this is a Django REST Framework project. What requirements.txt lets us do, and here's the mic drop moment, is that before we've just like typed pip install Django, right? Pip install Django REST, we've had to manually do that. Well, now, if you type pip install, now I want you all to do this with me here. You're going to pip install, and then you're going to add the -r flag, signifying that you're using a requirements file. And then you type req and then tab to finish typing requirements because that's a really long file name and I don't want to type it out. So req tab. It also lets me know if I'm in the right directory. If it doesn't tab complete, it means it doesn't see that file there. So I'm going to pip install that and watch this. It looks in the requirements file and installs all of the dependencies that are listed in there. So when you have your requirements.txt file, it's not only a clear text readable way for us to say, oh yeah, this project is using Joser, so I should know how to use Joser. It's a way of creating all of the dependencies for your app into your Durham. Did everybody have the same output when they did pip install -r requirements.txt? Awesome. So we can now start our Django application. By the way, I think if you're going to refer to a project to get started in like building a Django app, refer to this video because, well, I haven't been rambling on side topics for a long time this morning. And two, this is how this is how your projects are going to want to look with a Durham, with envrc, a gitignore, and a requirements file. We haven't been doing requirements files up until now because really our projects are just like, oh, pip install Django REST Framework. But requirements as your projects get bigger are super important. So even if they are just a couple of these, like Django and Django REST Framework, I want you to put them in there for your sake. Any questions about requirements? It's definitely a convention. We could probably go to Robert's personal GitHub account, find any Django projects, we'd probably see requirements.txt out there. So this is something that people are using. But now that we have Django, we can start our project. So let's start a Django project since we have it installed. Now I'm going to show you, so don't get like too type happy here, because there's something I want to change about the Django admin start project command. Is that I'm going to type it just fine. I'm going to type Django admin start project, and I'm going to name the project front end fun. But here's where I'm going to pause. Like, don't hit enter. Is that if I just hit enter here, it would create another directory called front end fun, which would contain the manage py and all that stuff. And then it would create another directory inside of that called front end fun. And that's just too many directories. Like, that's like 3 directories deep called front end fun. So what we're going to do is we're going to say start project front end fun, and then we're going to press space, and then we're going to put a period at the end. And that says make the root of the project in this directory I'm currently in. Now, you don't want to run this command from the week 6 directory. You want to run this command while you're in the first front end fun directory. You do that. Notice when we go back to Atom that it created everything in this directory. We still have a front end fun project directory that is inside of the front end fun directory, but that is okay. That is an acceptable amount of nesting. Did everybody have the same output there? All right, so in doing that, now here at 9:53, after you've done all of that, let's push it up to GitHub. This is how I want you to work. Not necessarily like because we've only had a couple of weeks to do this stuff, but this is how you're going to want to work like a year from now, or even now. Like, this is going to be the habits that you're going to want to do. Even if you've just started the project and you don't have anything to show for it. Oh, when I type git status, it says that it's not a Git repository. So who remembers how to create your project as a Git repository? What's the first command you run? Git init. Or as I like to say, it's sort of like what you say to your directory. Like, hey, git init. Come on, Father's Day was yesterday. I'm allowed to do these kinds of jokes. So we're going to type git init. And that's going to initialize our front end fun project as a Git repository. By the way, over the weekend, my daughter was sitting on one of those chairs. It's like a hand, and this like totally sun-baked beach dude walks up, and he's just like, "I bet she's a handful." And I was like, "That's the kind of dad joke I appreciate." He just looked at me with this real tough guy look, and says, "Happy Father's Day." I'm like, "Okay, I love Myrtle Beach now." Yeah, we shared kind of we were just one bro fist away from being best friends. Okay, so we've got our Git repository initialized. Let's see, it's storing an envrc, a git ignore file, front end fun directory, manage py and requirements txt. I can't think of a better start to a project. Like, this is as greenfield and beautiful as it can be. So after I've initialized and I want to add all this stuff to a commit, what's my next step? I don't want to type all the individual files out. So how do I add all of these files to a commit? Yeah, we could do a README file. Let's do that. That's a good point. I'm going to say that at this point, like, no, we won't make it optional. But it's not going to be crucial to the creation of your project, but it's going to be really good for people who are looking to hire if they're looking at your projects. So let's create a README file. Make a new file, call it readme.md. I'm going to put a hash mark called front end fun with Django. And then down here you can type all the text that you want, but I'm not going to, just for brevity. Other fun things that you can add, you could copy and paste a license into here. Like, if you think this is going to be code that other people are going to find useful, you can add like an MIT or a BSD license or something. And that way, if anybody's working at a company and they like your code and you want them to use your code, they officially can because it's licensed under an open license. if people just can't take code that's unlicensed and use it in their big company, like their legal team will just take a poop on them. Sorry. My phone is just vibrating a lot this morning. Okay, so now what do we do after making the README? What's that? Get add what? Does that work? It's not. It didn't add these two though. That's weird. I've actually never used get add star. Did I tell you all to do that? Wow. Okay. My bad.
Two ways we did one where you back out of the directory and then do the directory name / period.
No, you don't have to back out here. You could do get add dot right here. Now that will add those two files as well. I've actually never used get add star. I don't know why I would have told you all to use that. Maybe, was I not feeling good last week? Damn it! I can't blame it on my sickness. Either way, get add dot is the more aggressive of the two. So if you just want everything, you just do get add dot. And I'm going to make my commit. And the first commit I almost always call like initial commit. Because this project isn't doing anything yet. We haven't configured anything. Really all we've done is we've said Django create a project and make an initial commit. This is a great first commit. So if you're ever thinking when you're working on your homework, what's my first commit look like? That right there should be your first commit. All right. Should we push it up to GitHub yet? This is a tricky question. I always tell you when I'm going to trick you, but this is a tricky question. Should we push it up to GitHub yet? We haven't set it up to a repository yet. Good point. So the literal answer is we can't push it up to GitHub yet because we haven't set it up in a remote repository. Again, though, I'll ask you the same question. Should we push it up to GitHub? This is a tricky question. Like I said, I will trick you.
Might as well.
Might as well? Why might as well?
Just so you can see what's actually physically there.
Okay. Does anybody want to take the counterpoint? Does anybody want to go the low road? Like, nah, I'm not ready to push this. I don't want the world to see this. The real answer is it's a conditional answer. So yes, if we were to push this up to GitHub right now, nothing bad would happen. It would be just fine. And actually, you'd be safer because if your computer just decided it's going to power off for the last time in its life, at least you would have the code that you pushed up to GitHub so far. We wouldn't have wasted our morning creating this project. However, this commit is very low impact. This isn't doing much. And since we've made the commit, you can push multiple commits at a time. I don't know if you all have noticed this in your workflow, but you can add commit, add commit, add commit 5 times, and then when you're ready, push them on up to GitHub. It will track the times that you've created those commits when you've actually made the commit. This is why Git, when I got started with it, a lot of people were really excited about Git because it allowed them to work on an airplane. That they didn't have to have a persistent Wi-Fi connection to make a commit, and it would track the times that they actually did their work. So if you were a manager and you wanted to see when someone was doing their work, like for example, if I was to go into my projects directory and go to like here, I can look at the time each one of these commits was created, not when they were pushed to the server. So let me go ahead and close out of here. So it's very good to just be offline and work on a beach maybe. And then when you have a Wi-Fi signal or when you have some form of internet, do a git push and it's all backed up on GitHub or GitLab or it's called Microsoft GitHub now. Brought to you by Microsoft, featuring Azure Cloud Deploys. All right, so yes, like I said, the answer is conditional. I'm not going to push it right now, though, mainly because I haven't created the remote repository and I want to do more work. So we've got our project. Now what I need to do is, by the way, we're done with the whole Durham project scaffolding step. Like that would be considered step 0, what we just did. Does that cover everything you kind of had questions about, John? Like wanting to see the Durham env new Django project kind of thing you brought up this morning?
So we didn't have to install Durham for everything. We just create that env.rc file and then Durham allow on that.
Yeah, so the thing that I had mentioned on the install party, maybe I mentioned it again when we installed it on your computer, is that the only thing you need to do once with Durenv is like brew install Durenv and add that line, the hook line to your hook line and sinker to your bash RC file or your bash profile file. So what that does, that enables it sort of to act on the directory. I wouldn't worry too much about what that stuff does. You just do that once when you buy a new computer, and you never remember it. You never remember to do it again. Because after that, all you need to do is just make an envrc file and say Durenv allow, and that project is now a Durenv managed project. Super important stuff to remember there. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to start with step 1. So step 0 was setting up the project, setting up the dependencies, requirements.txt, get ignore, envrc. Like the end to end, like if that's the step you go through, like step 1, all through those to start a new project, you're going to be set for life. Well, set for at least your Django development life, because that's a really good process to go through. That's the process I go through whenever I start a new project. So now what we want to do is we want to actually get started with an application that will serve up what we'll call a template. Because we're going to be learning about 2 new things today: templates and static files. And templates are not static files, and static files are not templates. However, they can be easily mixed up sometimes. And so we're going to cover templates first, and then we're going to cover static files after that. So before we, it would be awkward to just start setting up the app before we get like the break and the coffee and all that in the bathroom. So let's do all of that stuff and take a little bit, like maybe 10 minutes early to get started with our break. Come back, and then we can just hammer through templates and static files in one long session. How's that sound? Cool. Y'all definitely need coffee, by the way, just from looking at you. This weekend was rough on you, I can tell. All right. Yabba dabba doo.